Welcome back, everybody. Got about 2 minutes till we start, but for those of you joining us from the future, I just want to let you know this is episode 5 of Magik of Science. My name is Frank the Gray Mage. I will be your host, and today we will be talking about data science. So if you are joining us from the future by recording, go ahead and skip forward 2 minutes, and we'll get started. All right. Welcome, everybody. I've got a data-packed episode for you today, and it is very appropriate because today we are talking data science. All right, so this is a huge, as always, a huge container here. So I've broken it down to a few categories that I think are extremely relevant. I'm going to start there, and as always, if anyone's interested in hopping in, we have space for that. So today, just kind of an overview of what I'm going to be going over. I want to talk about what is data, first off. So I'm going to be talking about qualitative versus quantitative data. I want to talk about data and technology, that kind of crazy relationship. I want to talk a little bit about AIs because I think everyone's got it twisted. AIs essentially are just big data pools. I'm going to talk a little bit about data security. We're going to roll that into your avatar, which is basically the online version of you, the data points that others are collecting. I want to talk about the gold rush, which that I mean the data science marketplace. And then if we have time, I'm going to get into psychographics and predictive math. So quite a big agenda today. Let's get started. So starting with qualitative versus quantitative data. Let's start with qualitative. Qualitative data are going to be all of the kind of personal data points, things that can't really be quantified numerically. Things like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite season? There are lots of different techniques, but there are 6 main techniques if you were to ask, like, say, a marketer or an economist. There are 6 main techniques that I'm going to be talking about. And so, let me get these cameras switched. Whoop. Starting with number 1 is one-on-one interviews. This one's very obvious, and if you are doing a one-on-one interview, everything is very transparent, right? Because you are answering the questions in accordance with that you know that this data is going to be used for something in the future. So that one I feel is very on the level. And there's focus groups, which this is kind of an expansion on one-on-one. Now you're looking at just a group of people instead of an individual. And you have record keeping. So this is where I feel that things maybe start to get a little bit ethically gray in the sense that most companies, or almost every company, or individuals really, are keeping some sort of records on themselves, whether it be like tax records, or medical records, or anything that you have a need to kind of prove, if you will. And so record keeping at face value is extremely ethical. But then you look at companies like, if we look at, like, say, social media, you start talking about record keeping in a way where they're kind of keeping your personal messages, they're keeping your comments, they're keeping everything and anything that you might say to a point where they're keeping a better record than you are on what you're doing. And in that area, I feel that things get kind of gray. But we might get back to that, so let's put a pin there. Observational. So this one is very easy and apparent too. Observational, it can be very easy or very difficult depending on what kind of target you're talking about. I'll get back to targets when we start talking about data security. And what I mean by this is a soft target versus a hard target. Just kind of a quick synopsis of this. If you're one of those people that has your birth date and your mother's maiden name and your address and stuff on social media, you're a soft target. You might think about changing some of that to kind of harden yourself up. All right, and then there are longitudinal studies. So this is kind of about studying over time. And so when you study the same data set, but you do it several times over a length of time. And the reason you want to do this is because you want to try to monitor change so that you can create kind of a more predictive understanding of what's happening. And then you have case studies. Case studies, I like to use case studies personally to kind of understand outlier data that doesn't necessarily fit inside of the data set, and maybe understand like what and how that was even possible. All right, so moving into data and technology. Well, we touched on it a little bit as far as like things like social media, but what I really mean by data and technology is I want to kind of talk about some of the current statistics and demands of data. So currently, the data market is worth, this year it'll be worth $103 billion. All right? Every person in 2020 generated 1.7 megabytes in 1 second. So like, there are some crazy statistics here. Oh, this one's really good too. Predictions estimate that the world generates 181 zettabytes of data by 2025. I don't even know how many zeros are in a zettabyte, honestly. But it is a lot. And so that's like the annual intake. Data actually requires physical space. Right? There are companies that you wouldn't normally see in the data market. Companies like Ford, like lots of car companies actually. A lot of people are buying up physical land right now and creating data warehouses because they see that there's going to need to be physical facilitation for all of this data that we're producing. And industries like, like web design or web admins or domains and like anything that's based in helping people produce content, these technologies are on the up and up, and the speed in which that we have accessibility to burn data is also on the up and up. So data is a huge industry, and the technology around it that's supporting it, like you have a few cutting edge technologies that maybe we have like 10 or more years, like quantum computing, for example. They're working on quantum servers, which there's technically no limitation on how much data compression. Actually, according to data science, you can only compress something 97% before you start to lose the essence, and it cannot be like uncompressed. You cannot unzip the file, if you will, after 97%. So quantum computers, they possibly could unlock our perfect scenario data compression, and we could compress all, like the entire internet, all 181 zettabytes a year. We could compress that down to 3% of the demand. But even still, all that's going to do is unlock us to render things in 12K now. So with the bell curve going exponentially up, we have to come up with better and better solutions. And we are. A lot of our containers that we use, things like RAM or ROM, a lot of our data containers, they're getting bigger and bigger logically while they're getting smaller and smaller physically. But I wonder how long it will be until even that starts to be not enough. Anyways, moving on into AI. I don't want to talk about the stereotypical like AI humanoid robot, like the things walking around, if you will, or like the robot apocalypse. I want to talk today more about like personal AI assistants, smaller neural networks. And I want to talk about the difference, because it's not that big, between a neural network and deep learning. So like literally the only difference, and I don't know exactly what the qualifying number is, but the only difference between a neural network and deep learning is the number of levels. So technically a neural network is you have an input that goes into a black box where there's several scenarios. That's called a layer, and that creates an output. All right, you can stack those layers, as many as you want, to create variation in the outcome. And at a certain point, when you have a really big stack, it's no longer a neural network. You've implemented deep learning. Okay, none of these things are anywhere near, like we haven't even begun to try to imagine how a synapse-based network, like brain network, would work. And so what we are creating instead is we're creating something that is good enough to trick the human eye. Right? AI works very similar to movies. Movies, for example, are a series of still pictures that move so fast that the human interpretation doesn't catch the difference. And that's all AI is doing. These things like painting robots, these things like facial replication, voice replication, these marketing robots. Somebody who works in marketing very often, I see all the time, tons and tons of different kinds of AI content generating robots. I think this is the beginning of a more practical side of data that most of us haven't really been privy to or had time to imagine, which is data, especially as it starts to talk more and more to itself. Data is going to allow us to actuate in ways that are extremely advantageous based on very accurate percentiles, right? If there is a neural network or deep learning program that is assigned to me via my phone, and it starts to learn all my habits, like maybe it's even hooked up into some of my biometric information, this thing could take my goals and it could apply a series of changes for me, suggestions, if you will. And if I choose to follow said suggestions, then the likelihood of me achieving these goals is going to increase over time as data gets more and more accurate, and these things like neural networks and deep learning become more and more accessible to the daily man, which they already are. I'm sure by now you've seen some of the wild art that's been being generated by AI. And some people, as an artist, I'm like right in the middle, some people hate this. They feel that robots shouldn't be creating art. And then other people feel that it is the future, like most laborious jobs, which art is a labor, it's a labor of love, but it is a labor. Most laborious jobs can be done by robots, whether that be a virtual one via programming or a physical one via mechanics. All right, and so as we have these thinking machines, if you will, remember these are just big data pools, they're not actual AI, but as we have these big data pools, some people are also worried about, well, what does that mean for internet security, which is already kind of a slippery slope in today's information age? Well, in theory, there are definitely people out there, hackers, that are creating AI-led, whether it be brute force mechanics, trying to break passwords, or data collection, or possibly even like email spoofing that's done by a robot now. Sure, there are all of these artificial means in which people can attack you, but if you do a good job, it doesn't matter. It just means that, you know, like the AI might be trying to learn you and it might be trying to manipulate you, but if you stick to some basics when it comes to data security, you'll be fine. Which, number one, never open a hyperlink in an email. That sounds obvious, but there are some pretty convincing ways that words can be put together that can make a sense of urgency or an emotional response rise out of you, especially if something like a neural network has been watching you, right? So most big companies and no government organizations will not contact you with any sort of hyperlink via email, because they understand, probably pay for training for their staff and stuff, how bad email phishing actually is. Companies fall victim to it all the time. It's actually the number one crime that happens to, number one white collar crime. And so Emails, right? Like that's the number one doorway that people are going to be trying to use. Number two is passwords. All right, and this one, a lot of people, they hate it when I say this, and everyone wants to fight me. So I'm just going to say it. It might be controversial, but I promise you this is the best strategy that you can go about. All right, so we all know a couple basic rules. We know that we should use at least one or more of every character type or character family. So that being capital alphabet, lowercase alphabet, numerical, and acceptable symbol. Acceptable because if you use the shift icon, you hit any of the numbers, you're pretty safe. But some places will or will not let you use things like quotations, spaces, and whatnot. Normally, underscore and dashes are pretty safe too. I like to use dashes a lot. And so if you have, if you bring in one character or more from each of those worlds, then your alphabet selection from the robot or the human trying to hack you goes from 26 to like 80 something. So it's a bigger pool, and that pool's exponent, it's squared by the power of every keystroke that you hit. And so if you hit a minimum of, say, like 12 keystrokes, you're going to be in the billions of combinations possible. And so that empowered by things like email attempt limitations or timeout resets, which I know I've lost a password and I've triggered one of those, and it is super annoying. It is super annoying when you get locked out for 5 minutes. And that's normally like gives you the time to remember or look up the password, so it serves two purposes, but be extremely grateful when you see that, because if that happens to you, if you are trying to log into an account and you get locked out or timed out for a period of time, they are protecting you. They're protecting you by making it so something like an AI robot that's trying to break in is going to be subjugated to limitations of times and attempts. And so like that's a very powerful way to stop things like email breaking, or I'm sorry, password breaking. Well, what else can you do? What else can you do? If you are using Apple, then a lot of your stuff is encrypted. You have the option with modern updates to encrypt anything and everything. And if you are that worried about it, I suggest that you do that. There are ways that you can do encrypted email. You can encrypt certain folders and stuff on your computer, and I do recommend that, especially for things like financial information, PPI, which is like personal information, things like medical records, etc. All of that should be under lock and key, 100%. That way, even if somebody does say that you make a mistake, or even you don't, just somebody's that good and they wanted you that bad, because it can happen, right? If those that know how can. So if you get hacked and they take everything, they take over your computer, if you have encrypted your personal informations and made backups, let them have it. They can't do anything to you unless they break your encryption, which, if you do your diligence, that's going to be extremely difficult and not worth it unless they have already invested like 25, 30,000 into some crazy mega server that can break it over time a little bit more efficiently. They can't get any of your goods. So always encrypt your data. Now, if you are even more worried about it, or if you're looking to take advantage of things like streaming services, for example, there is this program, if you will, called a VPN, or a virtual private network. And so VPN, these things are really cool. You can get them most of the time on like any kind of computer. You can get them on your phone, you can get them on like a console, Xbox, or whatever. You can definitely get it on your computer. Most of the time you're going to be paying a little bit, but if you're worried about internet security, it's worth it, because what a virtual private network can do is it can do a lot of things. Number one, it can, depending on which one you get, it can assign your router to any country in the world. And what that does for you is a couple things. Number one, it basically creates a fake IP address or MAC address. Like it creates a fake address. And so anyone who's trying to, like, say, data shark you, if somebody's like tracking your wire or tracking your packets as they come in and out of your router, it's going to look like they're coming from China or wherever it is that you have set. Now, what's cool about this is if you have streaming services like Netflix, this is how you unlock geographical limitations for the content that they provide, because companies like Netflix and Hulu and whatnot and all these streaming services, they only give you like a small window into all of the stuff that they have. And so if you're into, like, if you like Squid Games, it might behoove you to check out getting a VPN and transferring your data to Korea and seeing what comes up, because you can get the whole Korean package. So that's extremely cool, because you could just you can literally surf through most countries. In most countries too, you're going to have an English translation option. So it's a good way to get some culture cinema. And then you can, if you think about it, you cancel all of your services except for one. Now you have an international service and you're paying way less. And VPNs are normally $5 a month. So you could save a lot of money if you're willing to read some subtitles. And lastly, a lot of good VPNs, what they'll allow you to do is actually scramble your IP. So it will jump from country to country. And so anyone who wants to track you, now if you're using encryption, which a lot of VPNs do, anyone who's trying to track you, if they get you at your first jump, they will only get the data available when you're, let's say, in Russia. And then you're going to jump to China, and they either have to immediately know and follow you, which if you're scrambled well, that's going to be extremely difficult to do. And they're going to have to do that every time you jump, which you could set this to 60 seconds. You're in a new country every 60 seconds. And that's incredibly hard to track. Now, let's say that they have tracked you, but you have encryption running, or they weren't able to get your first hop. If they weren't there when you opened up the internet and you turned on your VPN, then they can't follow it all the way back to you no matter what. And if you're using encryption, they're going to have to decrypt it every new connection. So even if they have a mega billion-dollar computer and they can decrypt you, say within 2 minutes, well, too bad they have 60 seconds, and every 60 seconds the lock changes, if you will. So VPNs, especially encrypted VPNs, that's probably as far as an average human being and within reason when it comes to purchase power, that's probably your best bet when it comes to privacy and data. All right? But it doesn't matter, right? If you're doing all of that, it doesn't matter if you have a big mouth or fat fingers, as I like to call it, meaning that you can have the most secure private network in the world. If you're publicizing your information, who gives a shit? You're caught, right? So there are times where certain accounts or certain agreements that happen online, they require us to render things like PPI, which is personal information. Right? Most government websites provide encryption, so you're going to be doing okay. If you're say rendering a driver's license photo and whatnot. Be careful with .govs, because there are spoofers and hackers out there that use .gov every once in a while. You won't see it often because the feds do sweep for fake .govs. Right? If you are a social media person, or if you're a business person, you're a fan of digital connection or communication at all, I challenge you to audit yourself, right? To go back to make a list of every social media account that you've ever had, every business account that you've ever had, every subscription that you've ever paid, whatever. Make a list and just know that all of those people have your credit card information. They have some receipt history. They have gender, age, possibly address. These people have all sorts of stuff. And so if they get hacked because they're doing record keeping your qualitative and quantitative data, if they get hacked, now somebody else has your information. And there's not much you can do to prevent that. All you can do is prepare yourself. You can prepare yourself. Well, before I get into too far ahead of myself, let's talk about some of the general data collectors as well. There are companies that get paid to collect data for things like politics. There are scientific experiments or pharmaceutical experimentation that happens where your data is being collected, and it may be happening in a way where you're not like, there's the obvious, there's the stuff that you give them, but then there's the stuff that like they are there to measure, and a lot of the times they kind of keep that under hush hush, like corporate secret and whatnot. But companies like Facebook sell your data to people like me. And what I mean by that is, as a marketer, for roughly $5, I can purchase feed space for roughly 250 people just like you. And this isn't just any feed space. This is feed space that has collected qualitative and quantitative data on you for as long as you've been producing it, and it gives me a direct pipeline into your history of choices. And using your history of choices, I can put decisions in front of you that you may or may not even want to make, but you're more compelled to than the average person, so you just might. And this is the power of your avatar. I like to mess with the AIs when it comes to social media. One way you can combat this, well, two ways. Number one, you can use it. I like to do that for pages. Using it means that, okay, they're going to be collecting your information, so give it to them. Tell them everything that you're into. Give them your interests. Give them your hobbies. Give them everything, so that way your feed is exactly what it should be. Everything you want. Right? And then there's method two, which is give them nothing or give them something confusing. Give them nothing means like use these social medias for kind of like, I guess you could call it stalking. Use it more for data collection than for data generation. And what I mean by mix it up is every once in a while, search something completely random. Treat it like you're in Amazon and, you're just sitting at work or whatever and you've got 20 minutes to burn and you don't need anything, but you're on Amazon. So just start, searching, randomize it a little bit. So that way it's not creating an echo chamber. You're inviting in difference instead of indifference. So that was a lot. I am going to take a cognitive pause and open up the floor. And I have a question today that I wanted to pose, and I've got, looks like I've got Jackie, a lovely partner here on Clubhouse Live. What either scares you or brings you hope about big data? That is the question today.
Hey there. Okay, so as far as brings me hope, I think there's a lot of really impressive power in big data. I think coming from the scientist perspective, we have better data means better analysis, bigger tools means more accurate predictive powers, and so we could do some really impressive stuff as far as knowing our world, seeing our world, projecting into the future. Of course, all those things should be taken with a grain of salt. But what we can learn from big data, depending whether it's economics, whether it's science, whether it's disease, psychology, climate change, etc. I think, the more data always, the more powerful it is. And it's always a dream of a scientist to have as much data as possible, right? Because then your statistics are going to be better. And so that's, I think, exciting. And as we learn better what to do with data and how to process it, I see a lot of people out there using all this big data for more humanitarian efforts. I have a friend who basically what she does is she pulls big data from prisons to kind of help figure out who actually needs to be still incarcerated and who not, and it kind of help people get on their feet and look at data and help us look at, okay, where are we failing in our prison systems? How can we help people actually recuperate and not come back in? And that's powerful and can change people's lives. And I think that's really, really cool, which goes into, ethical uses of AI. As far as fears, it's always scary on an individual level. There's a lot of data out there that we're not aware of. And it's what thing did I say when I was 16 is going to come back and bite me later?
Definitely.
Or, am I at risk of putting myself for identity theft, or could I put my company at risk? And if I have clients, could I put my clients at risk? It's scary when it also becomes not just about you, but also people that rely on you and count on you.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your share. Yeah, Yeah, one topic that definitely like rings true to both sides of what you're saying to me, at least personally, is psychographics, which, to pander to where we started, psychographics is like a very specific kind of qualitative data. Psyche graphics, so like brain math, if you will. Um, there is a kind of math that is developing, and it's very infantile, meaning like the last 5 years, called predictive math. Now, predictive math is scary promising. It's scary promising in the way that when it comes to large groups, think like China, right, where AI is very involved in data collection, right, where when they start applying qualitative objectives to quantitative data, meaning that they've turned everyone's favorite colors, everyone's unique walks into percentages and 1 through 10 scales, and everybody has their place, and they start making decisions based on where everyone is placed. That scares me, and it brings me a lot of hope. It scares me because what if they're wrong? What if society mislabels you and you get thrown into the wrong pipelines, and because of that, like, your life is just not yours? And the thing that seems kind of cool about that is the implications of what if it's correct seem to be almost I don't even know how to it's like heavenly in the sense, the way I imagine it is that your phone tells you a lot about the world around you, specifically in the way that it knows you want to ingest it, and because of that you go out into the world and are extremely well received in whatever it is that you're trying to do. And there's been some horror.
Are you talking about confirmation biases in our data pool from our avatar?
Yes. I was just going to reference some cinema that I've seen where there's some racist data, which is an interesting conundrum because numbers, right? They have a history of, there's quotes about numbers like numbers don't lie. But then there's biased data that's being generated through the numbers. And what's scary about this is, like, at some point we have to admit that we've come so far with numbers that there is a large portion of what's supposed to be known as truth, called numbers, that is subjective. And I think that you could even extrapolate that to most truth. Now, this is going to get a little off topic here, but this is some, like, I guess you will call it data science history. All right? Once upon a time, there was no man, and then there was, and then man invented language, and then man invented written language. And right when around the time that man invented written language, most of man had no clue how to read it. And man was illiterate, the majority of man was illiterate for a very long time. During this time, those that knew how to write and read were still limited by things like language. And so if you knew how to write and read, it doesn't mean that you knew how to write and read everything. In fact, your language was like one of like hundreds historically. And so you knew how to read a very, very small amount. So during this time period, man felt very comfortable writing truth and writing fundamental truth. During this time period, right, like, we'll call it like everything up to the Bible, like pre-Bible time periods, where all the philosophy came from that was translated into religious texts, right? Where all of the myths that we are now starting to unravel as modern psychology, things like Munich connecting us to quantum physics, these fundamental truths got buried right around the time that man became literate. Because right around the time that the Bible entered the scene, and the Quran entered the scene, and all these other, the Torah, and like all these other things entered the scene, man was mostly becoming or mostly literate. And we had translators now, and fast forward a little bit later, we created the printing press. And so we could translate one book into all languages. And right around the time that that happened, I believe that we switched from writing truth, fundamental truth, to writing facts. Now, facts are still truth, but they're a small part of the truth. And if you have the right collection of facts, you can control the narrative of reality. And I think that's what's been done in history.
So I think that it kind of, one of the things they teach you about when you're learning like the scientific method, and I think it kind of gets at what you're getting at, is to understand like correlation versus causation, especially when you're looking at data pools, because it's really easy to see, oh, these two things happen at the same time. So I think when I was in school, the like textbook example was they found that ice cream sales and murders were positively correlated. That when there are more ice cream sales, there are also more murders. And so, you know, you could easily look at that and be like, oh, so more ice cream equals more murders. And that's not the case. It's actually that when temperatures go up, there's both more ice cream sales and more murders. And so even though maybe that's a fact, it's not the truth. And so that's something that they warn about like responsible data interpretation, so that you're not, you know, taking all this data and, you know, utilizing it and saying it's something that it's really not.
That is a very fair point. And I think that message actually, like, if you don't take anything from this chat, take that from this chat. That truth has become subjective. There are more opinions and answers than there are questions these days when it comes to the internet of everything. And just like me sitting here talking to you, telling you the facts and the truth, that's just one more opinion in a sea of facts and truth. And the scary part, the hard part to accept, is that most likely most of these truths are mostly true for somebody, or if not most of us. But none of them are actually true. The only truth is change. All right, and I think on that note, on that pleasant little brain food, I think we're going to close out today. Well, thank you everyone who's still here and listened. I hope you enjoyed the show today. I am going to pull up the calendar real quick and see what we've got on the docket, because next week is a brand new week. So, starting with Sunday, because as you guys should know by now, we do live streamings every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Next Sunday, we have episode 6 of Happy Healthy Love, where we are going to break down honesty. And then Tuesday at 4 p.m., we have Capital Consciousness, episode 6, Breaking Ground in a New Market, followed on Thursday by Magik of Science, episode 6, The Multiverse. Ooh, that one's going to be fun. I'll do my best to try to keep it relevant and not jump into comic books, but no promises. All right, as always, thank you guys for joining